Okay, so we have a lot of stuff to cover today. I forgot to mention last week, or last time, I sent out an email about some volunteer opportunities, and it's environmental volunteer work, and there's not a whole lot of slots, but if you do manage to go and if you want to go and you manage to go and you get a picture or some kind of proof you were there, send it to me. That'll be a good deal of extra credit. Okay, it's not required at all. I don't think there's enough room for all of the class if I wanted to require it. But anyway, I sent the email, and that's actually all the information I have. If you didn't get the email, let me know, and I can send it to you. And I'm talking to an empty tripod with no camera on it. Bear with me a second while I set that up. Also, March Mammal Madness has started. And we've done the wild card, and they've done the part of the first round that is red in fur. They did that last night. Let's see who just came in. Okay, so other things. I sent out an email yesterday. I'm sure you got several from Ms. Trilly. Yesterday was the last day to pay for your AP exam. If you didn't get that done, you can talk to Ms. Trilly. I don't know if there's any leeway, but what the email said is if you didn't pay yesterday, you didn't get to take the exam. If that happens, if you're not taking the exam, it does not affect your grade in any way. The only thing it will affect is, and I'm not sure exactly how this is going to work this year, but in the past, if you took the AP exam, you didn't have to take a final exam. If you don't, I have to come up with a final exam for you. So that's the only difference it will make. And I guess that's all the information I have. Remember, there will be a test Friday. Oh, the College Board Unit 5 test will be open on Friday. And take it sometime before Sunday, please, so I can get grades in. All right, let's see the results of March Mammal Madness. I haven't even watched this video yet. Did y'all get to see the first rodent roundtable? Yeah, okay. Yes? Did I? Oh, okay. I meant to ask about that before I hit submit. I'm sorry. Juan, it's not here. Okay. I'm sorry, I haven't seen you guys in person that often, and you're wearing masks, so I'm having a hard time recognizing people. And I'm bad with faces anyway. Okay, I fixed it. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's the second rodent roundtable. Share screen.
When we began this mystery of March Mammal Madness, we discovered most of the rodents were clustered in the red in fur division. But why? Was there a secret league of red-headed rodents working together? Join us as we investigate the riddle of the red division. We stayed on the trail of the wildcard winning vole and tracked it to the Charles Darwin Reserve in Western Australia. The red kangaroo was casually casually grazing nearby. Was this some sort of covert meetup? No! The tiny vole was terrified by the giant marsupial's gigantic feet and scampered away into the scrub brush, leaving the kangaroo to hop into the next round. In this matchup, the maroon langur weighs in at 30.9 stoats, while the little red flying fox weighs in at only 2 stoats.
Okay, I'm not sure why, but in March Mammal Madness, they use stoats as a unit of measurement. If you don't know what a stoat is, it's kind of it's a mustelid, it's a weasel-like animal. So they're saying the langurs weighs as much as 30 stoats, and the flying fox is 2. So I don't know, I'd have to look that up.
Night fell in the Borneo forest, and the langur settled down to sleep. Suddenly, it heard a noise and called out. Shut up! What? The little red flying fox flitted nearby, searching for nectar, when it was trapped in a net. Humans hunt the flying foxes and eat them, sad to say. The langur, meanwhile, went to sleep, blissfully unaware of its victory. A suspicious meeting took place near a park bench in California. The ring-tailed von Sira climbed into a nearby trash can. Did it find a clue? No, it found a hamburger. The red fox, also hungry and hoping to find a snack, surprised the von Sira. They stared at each other. Then the fox lunged and chomped. The von Sira and the hamburger are no more.
Is that better for you?
MC, you may ask, where in the world is Carmen Swerviego? Well, I'm here in Botswana, with a chilling tale to tell. The red hartebeest was standing in the grass when it was startled by the red squirrel, dashing toward a tree for safety. The hartebeest also started running towards the tree. It ran into the squirrel and then ran over it. The squirrel has been squished over and out.
In the opening chapters of the March Mammal Madness mystery, the higher-ranked creatures enjoy home habitat advantage. So it was here where the Siberian weasel found itself on the much warmer home turf of the red rocket in Brazil. The weasel bounded up to the startled rocket.
Hello!
They regarded each other. The weasel then bounded off
Bye-bye.
in search of shade and food, leaving the confused rocket standing alone.
AMC, look, I'm in disguise.
Okay, well, anyway, I followed our suspects to Santa Marta, Colombia. The squirrel was getting settled in the trees when, pew, the tree rat showed up and started punching the squirrel. The kitty was all back, 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 pow, boom, bing, bing. It was great. And anyway, the squirrel just picked up and spread its arms and glided away. And that was the last I saw of it. Go, tree rat. Back to you. The enigmatic bay cat is very hard to find, but we tracked it down in Borneo, where it was searching for food. The red-rumped agouti had discovered a feast of palm fruit on the forest floor, and was oblivious to any approaching danger. The bay cat edged forward, then pounced and chomped. It was truly a study in scarlet. The agouti has been eliminated. The red-necked paddymmelon was nervously sitting under a tree in Madagascar when it heard a ruckus above it. What could it be? Was it a group of Tasmanian devils somehow up above it in the trees? The paddymmelon did not stick around to find out. It fled the scene, leaving the red-ruffed lemurs above it to celebrate loudly. Obviously, the reddish rodents were only red herrings. How disappointing. Nevertheless, we are still on the case. Join us next time. I am MC Marmot, and this is the mysterious March Mammal Madness.
So my wife used to work at the zoo, and for a while she was working with primates. And the she had a red-ruffed lemur she worked with. I'm pretty sure it's the same species. And she was scared of it, said it was really mean. And I also looked up how much it weighs. It's just over half a pound. So, just over half a pound, yeah. So, okay, so let's talk about the last of our unit. We were talking about fishing. If I recall, we talked about the different types of nets. Okay, so I believe this is where we ended off. Half the world's marine fish populations are fully exploited. That means we can't take any more without hurting the population if the populations are not already being hurt. 25% of the fish population are overexploited and heading to extinction. Luckily, the ocean's big and it's hard to push an oceanic species to extinction. Not impossible, but usually there's a couple of holdouts, and usually their populations can recover relatively quickly. And we showed here, this is before trawling and after trawling. This is very harmful to a lot of benthic communities, even ones you wouldn't think are too terrible, like a mudflat. There's animals living in the mudflat, and you tear it up, and it changes the ecosystem. So. We talked about bycatch. And we've already done this. What I didn't mention is the one industry of bycatch that I'm familiar with is shrimping. And for shrimping, and for every pound of shrimp they get about 10 pounds of bycatch. And most of that dies. In fact, the seabirds come and eat the bycatch when you throw it overboard. And I remember one year there was it's unusual, but you heard in the news, in the South, the Houston area does get cold snaps. And the cold snap came through that was cold enough to keep the shrimpers from going out. And the pelicans especially started to starve. And a couple of people actually went out to shrimp specifically to feed the pelicans. So. Now we talked about industrialized fishing. And what's going on now is fishing fleets travel longer distance to reach less portions of the ocean. Our effort for fishing has increased, but our catch has not increased because there's fewer fish. And it's getting bad enough in some places they're finding sea lions and things like that that are starving, and they think it's because we're catching too many fish out of the ocean. Okay, so this is where we left off.
Fish are in trouble. The cod population off Canada's east coast collapsed in the 1990s. Intense recreational and commercial fishing has decimated Goliath grouper populations in South Florida, and most populations of tuna have plummeted by over 50%. with the southern Atlantic bluefin on the verge of extinction. Those are just a couple of many examples. Overfishing is happening all over the world. How did this happen? When some people think of fishing, they imagine relaxing in a boat and patiently reeling in the day's catch. But modern industrial fishing, the kind that stocks our grocery shelves, looks more like warfare. In fact, the technologies they employ were developed for war. Radar, sonar, helicopters, and spotter planes are all used to guide factory ships towards dwindling schools of fish. Long lines with hundreds of hooks or huge nets round up massive amounts of fish, along with other species like seabirds, turtles, and dolphins. And fish are hauled up onto giant boats, complete with onboard flash freezing and processing facilities. All of these technologies have enabled us to catch fish at greater depths and farther out at sea than ever before. And as the distance and depth of fishing have expanded, so has the variety of species we target. For example, the Patagonian toothfish neither sounds nor looks very appetizing, and fishermen ignored it until the late 1970s. Then it was rebranded and marketed to chefs in the US as Chilean sea bass, despite the animal actually being a type of cod. Soon it was popping up in markets all over the world and is now a delicacy. Unfortunately, these deep water fish don't reproduce until they're at least 10 years old, making them extremely vulnerable to overfishing when the young are caught before they've had a chance to spawn. Consumer tastes and prices can also have harmful effects. For example, shark fin soup is considered such a delicacy in China and Vietnam that the fin has become the most profitable part of the shark. This leads many fishermen to fill their boats with fins, leaving millions of dead sharks behind. The problems aren't unique to toothfish and sharks. Almost 31% of the world's fish populations are overfished, and another 58% are fished at the maximum sustainable level. Wild fish simply can't reproduce as fast as 7 billion people can eat them. Fishing also has impacts on broader ecosystems. Wild shrimp are typically caught by dragging nets the size of a football field along the ocean bottom, disrupting or destroying seafloor habitats. The catch is often as little as 5% shrimp. The rest is bycatch, unwanted animals that are thrown back dead. And coastal shrimp farming isn't much better. Mangroves are bulldozed to make room for shrimp farms, robbing coastal communities of storm protection and natural water filtration, and depriving fish of key nursery habitats. So what does it look like to give fish a break and let them recover? Protection can take many forms. In national waters, governments can set limits about how, when, where, and how much fishing occurs, with restrictions on certain boats and equipment. Harmful practices such as bottom trawling can be banned altogether. And we can establish marine reserves closed to all fishing to help ecosystems restore themselves. There's also a role for consumer awareness and boycotts to reduce wasteful practices like shark finning and push fishing industries towards more sustainable. There's also a role for consumer awareness and boycotts to reduce wasteful practices like shark finning and push fishing industries towards more sustainable practices. Past interventions have successfully helped depleted fish populations recover. There are many solutions. The best approach for each fishery must be considered based on science, respect for the local communities that rely on the ocean, and for fish as wild animals. And then the rules must be enforced. International collaboration is often needed too, because fish don't care about our borders. We need to end overfishing. Ecosystems, food security, jobs, economies, and coastal cultures all depend on it.
They were talking about the protests and things like that. They protests, I can remember, it was quite a while ago. The public found out that tuna was caught in this one particular way. For some reason, schools of tuna hang out underneath dolphin pods. A pod is a group of dolphins. And you can see dolphins from a long way off because they jump out of the water, they come up to breathe. And so the tuna fishermen were setting their nets around the dolphins, hoping that there'd be tuna underneath. And a lot of dolphins are being killed this way. And people love dolphins. You know, they're charismatic, they're smart, and all that kind of stuff. And there was an outcry. And now you can pretty much, every can of tuna you buy, there's a little dolphin safe sticker saying they don't do that. So we can change things. Okay, aquaculture. You would think this is the solution to this. This is basically fish farms. Okay? They're highly efficient, and this is basically the aquatic version of the factory farms, but it's fish, so we don't care as much about how happy the shrimp and the fish are. They're highly efficient, require small areas, don't require as much fuel. You don't have to take your boats miles and miles out. Some examples are micro and macro algae. They actually farm algae. Carp. Carp, not so much here because we don't like to eat carp, but in Asia they do. Tilapia. Tilapia is one of the cheapest fish meats you can buy now. And you can get it at the stores, and it usually comes from fish farms. Salmon, catfish, shrimp, and crayfish, which in where I grew up, I was the only one that said crayfish because my parents were from West Texas and they called them crayfish. But in Texas, coastal Texas and Louisiana, it's crawfish or crawdads. Oysters, abalone, sea cucumbers. We don't eat sea cucumbers here, but in different parts of the world they do. They're related to starfish, but they're squishy. I'm not sure what a sea cucumber is. So we can grow all of these in, quote, fish farms. The crawfish was a big thing on the Texas coast. I actually had students working at crawfish houses, which were restaurants, basically. And I don't know if you've ever gone to a crawfish boil, but basically they dump on the middle of your table on a bunch of newspaper, a big pile of boiled crawfish, corn on the cob, potatoes and stuff, and you eat it. It's very different, very good. Though in my opinion, you spend more calories getting into a crawdad than you do eating it. It takes a while. You familiar with that? Yeah, they're very good, but it's a lot of work. There's even bycatch with crawfish farms, though. I was surprised to find out. One of my students brought me a turtle, and they said the turtle was in one of these bags. So they opened the bag, we're going to dump the crawdads into the pot to boil, and there was a little stink pot turtle that I kept for a long time. So anyway, that's what aquaculture is. We talked about aquaponics a little bit, and I think I showed the group A, but if you look over at the turtle tank, I've set up an experimental mini aquaponic setup. I've got the turtles in the bottom and I'm pumping the water into the top, and that's acting as a filter. The water is flowing over gravel and sponges and things like that. And I put some bean seeds up there, as well as some Elodea, which is the aquatic plant in the tank next to it. So the idea is the waste from the turtles, the ammonia, and the bacteria will turn the ammonia to nitrate, which is fertilizer. And hopefully the plants will grow well from the top there. We'll see. It's just a little experiment to see how it works. But we should have bean plants growing up there. And I put some cattail seeds up there too that I collected on a hike last weekend. I've never grown cattails from seeds, so I have no idea if they'll grow. But just throwing stuff in there to see what happens. But you can see the water flowing down. And yesterday, the turtles were taking showers, basically. They were climbing up on that rock and letting the water flow over their heads. It's kind of cute. Anyway, that's a combination of aquaculture and hydroponics. And they call that aquaponics. And that is being experimented with. I've shown you videos about that kind of stuff. But right now, we're mainly talking about aquaculture. Problems with aquaculture. Waste. Just like in feedlot agriculture, animals produce waste. And if you put a lot of animals together, they produce a lot of waste. Wastewater is full of nutrients, such as poop and uneaten food, that can lead to eutrophication. We talked a little bit about eutrophication, but it's been a while. That's when you have too much fertilizer in water and the algae goes nuts. And if you get too much algae, it clouds the water. It can actually suck the oxygen out of the water at night. Remember, plants produce oxygen, yes, but they also have cellular respiration. And if there's no sunlight, then they start pulling oxygen out of the water, and they can pull so much out it kills the fish. It also just totally changes up the ecosystem. If an area is supposed to have clear water and all of a sudden it's pea soup green, that's a problem. I've talked about the retention, maybe I haven't talked about it here. When I taught in Houston, we had a retention pond on campus, and we would go out there and collect fish and stuff. And sometimes of the year, it was solid packed with algae because of all the fertilizer they put on the grass on campus. Okay, escaped domestic organisms can escape and breed with native organisms or become an invasive species. This doesn't even have to be a different species. These farm-raised animals are selectively bred to be able to grow in a farm. And you don't necessarily want those genes going out and contaminating the native species. And if they're not native species, you sure don't want them out and about. And the density of the species can lead to disease, and the disease can spread to wild populations. Most of these places, the water, sometimes it's out in the ocean just with nets around it. And so you basically just net it off a part of the ocean and you're growing your fish. In that case, you don't have to worry about cleaning the water and everything because the ocean just flows through. It can contaminate the ocean, but it also is an easy way to spread diseases. With shrimp and crawfish, you've got them in big ponds. And the water does get contaminated, and you have to drain it and put new water in. And when you drain it, that water has to go somewhere, and that's when you're releasing the wastewater, full of nutrients, disease, and it's very hard to keep all the shrimp from getting sucked in. It's hard to keep some of them from getting sucked into your pump and shot out. So even then, even if it's in ponds, you can lose some of your animals. A wall can collapse, and you can have a flood of these invasive species getting out. So you have to be very careful with aquaculture. There's actually places in the desert, they've started some aquaculture for saltwater animals. And some places in the desert, I think in West Texas they were doing this. I'm not sure if there's any in New Mexico. There's salt water underground. You don't want to drink it, but if you pump up the water, some of it's salt water. And you can use that to grow shrimp, saltwater shrimp, in the middle of the desert, hundreds of miles from the ocean. But if you're in the middle of the desert and you've got all this salty water, what do you do with it when you're through? You can't just let it flow out on the desert. Talk about salinization. That's super salinization. So you've got to do something with all that contaminated water. So it's complicated, and you have different things you have to be able to take care of.
For 3 billion people around the world, seafood provides a significant source of protein and nutrition. But recent studies show that 33% of wild fisheries are overfished, while another 60% are fished at their maximum capacity. In fact, over half the seafood we eat, from finfish and shellfish to seaweed and algae, isn't caught in the wild. It's grown through aquaculture, or aquatic farming. Farmed seafood is one of the fastest growing food industries, expanding in volume by 5.8% each year. But different methods of aquaculture come with different advantages and issues, some of which echo the serious problems we've seen in industrial agriculture. So how can we avoid repeating the mistakes we've made on land at sea? What aquaculture approaches are we currently using, and what does a sustainable way to farm the ocean really look like? One of the most common aquaculture methods involves large pens made of nets, where fish are farmed offshore in floating cages, roughly 1,000 square meters in size. Commonly employed off the coast of Chile and in the fjords of Norway, these fish, like many industrially farmed animals, occupy stressful, overcrowded pens. They produce massive amounts of waste, polluting the surrounding areas and potentially spreading diseases to wild species. Worse still, since the antibiotics employed to fight disease aren't fully absorbed by the fish, they get excreted back into the environment. Net pens are also susceptible to escapes, unleashing huge numbers of fish which compete for resources and weaken the local gene pool with genes adapted for captivity. Escaped fish can even disrupt local ecosystems as invasive species. Other techniques, such as man-made coastal ponds commonly used for shrimp farming in Southeast Asia, create additional environmental problems. Just like net pens, these ponds are prone to spreading pollution and disease. Their construction also frequently destroys important ecosystems like mangroves and marshes, which protect coastal areas from storms, provide habitats, and absorb tons of greenhouse gases. One way to solve these problems is to farm fish on land in completely contained systems. Tanks and raceways can recirculate and filter water to prevent pollution. But even fully contained facilities still contend with another major hurdle: fish meal. About 10% of the seafood caught globally is used to feed animals, including carnivorous farmed fish. Researchers are working on fish feed made of insects and plant-based proteins, but for now, many inland fish farms are connected to overfishing. All these obstacles can make sustainable aquaculture feel a long way off, but innovative farmers are finding new ways to responsibly farm the seas. The most promising solution of all may be to look lower on the food chain. Instead of cramming large carnivorous fish into pens, we can work with natural ocean systems to produce huge amounts of shellfish and seaweeds. These low-maintenance flora and fauna don't need to be fed at all. In fact, they naturally improve water quality, filtering it as they feed off of sunlight and nutrients in the seawater. By absorbing carbon through photosynthesis, these farms help battle climate change and reduce local ocean acidification while creating habitats for other species to thrive. Shifting to restorative ocean farming could provide good jobs for coastal communities and support healthy plant and shellfish-based diets that have an incredibly low carbon footprint. In just 5 months, 4,000 square meters of ocean can produce 25 tons of seaweed and 250,000 shellfish. With the right distribution network, a series of small farms collectively the size of Washington state could feed the planet. Farms like these are already popping up around the globe, and a new generation of farmers is stepping up to pursue a more sustainable future. Done properly, regenerative ocean farming could play a vital role in helping our oceans, our climate, and ourselves. If overfishing continues at its current rate, will the ocean ever run out of fish? Check out this video to learn more. For 3 billion people around the world.
So one of the things I just wanted to point out is they talked about, growing plants in the ocean is going to help global warming. Well, it does take carbon out of the air to make the plant, yes. But when you eat the plant and you kill the plant, that carbon goes right back. So it may help on the short term, but it doesn't help on the long term, because the long term, we have millions of years of carbon dioxide that we're pumping into the atmosphere from underground, and growing plants is not going to make that much of a difference, because like I said, as soon as you eat it, that carbon goes right back. So.
World, seafood provides a significant source of protein and nutrition. Fisheries are overfished.
So that's it for fishing and aquaculture. Like I said, we're going through a lot of this really fast. So let's talk about urbanization. Let's totally switch gears. This is not a noticeable problem in New Mexico because we have a very small population density compared to the rest of the country for the most part. But it is a big problem around the world. And I'll show you some evidences of it here too. Urbanization is the movement of people from rural to urban areas. Okay. Over 50% of the population is urban. That's a big change from in the past. In the past, very few people lived in the cities because it took so many people to grow food. And you can't grow food in a city on the scale that you need to feed the city. So for most of our civilization, most of humanity's existence, people did not live in big cities. Not a lot of them anyway. There's 20 cities on the planet that are home to more than 10 million residents. Most of the fast-growing cities are in developing countries. Developing countries are embracing the green revolution, need fewer farmers, and so they go to the cities because that's where the jobs are. They don't need to live on the farms anymore. They have less need for farm labor due to industrialization. A gas-powered tractor can do the work of a lot of human farmers, basically. So this shows the rural population versus the urban population from the 1950s. So for the more developed regions, it's not as extreme because by the 1950s, we already had people moving off the farms. But this is the less developed regions. You can see it's quite a big difference, especially the number of living in cities. The rural population is staying pretty constant, but that's probably because of population growth. So, but you can see a much larger percentage of the people are living in the cities than they were 50 years ago, 70 years ago. Suburbs. With easy transportation, we have the growth of the suburbs. This is a new thing since the automobile, basically. Used to, if you lived in a city, you lived in the city because you had to walk where you were going. If you worked in the city, you had to live in the city. Now we have cars and freeways. And so the suburbs are growing because people don't want to live in the cities, some people. And they want to have a yard and have more space and not live in a high rise. So they move to the suburbs, smaller communities that ring cities. This decentralization is easy because of transportation, easy transportation. Most of the country, it's cars. Some parts of the country, it's buses and trains. The effects of this, more driving, more disturbed land, more traffic, sprawl. To give you an idea of traffic, we used to live outside of the city of Houston. We never lived inside the city limits, but we lived in what would be called the suburbs or even further out from that. But my wife worked at the zoo, I mentioned, and the zoo is in downtown. On the weekends, if we wanted to go to the zoo, we could talk her into going to the zoo with us. It would take about 30 minutes to get to the zoo from our house. But on her drive, it took over an hour to get there and to get back because of traffic. Rush hour, everybody going into the cities to go to work, there's huge traffic problems. We don't see that a whole lot in Farmington. If you spend any time in Albuquerque, they have their problems, but it's on a much smaller scale than the big cities. That's the same graph here. Okay, so I'm talking about the Houston-Galveston Metroplex right now just because I'm familiar with it. It's a good example. The Houston-Galveston Metroplex, this is basically the area between Houston and Galveston. It was 2.3 million people in 2016. That's larger than the population of 5 states. In 2018, New Mexico had a population of 2.1 million. So the place where I grew up, there are more people just within 50 miles than there are in the entire state of New Mexico. Which was mind-boggling because when we moved here. It was one of the reasons we moved here, honestly. We like New Mexico, but there's a lot fewer people. We like to hike and all that stuff. Well, my grandparents retired in Burrito, so we spent a lot of time there when I was growing up. My wife and I came to New Mexico to hike and camp a lot. And one reason probably because it was closer than Colorado, but Colorado is also a lot more expensive to live. In some places, but there's mountainous areas here that are as nice as Colorado. You go up around Burridoso, Cloudcroft, and Gila Wilderness and stuff like that. There's some nice areas. The mountains aren't quite as steep, high, and jagged. And we're still not that acclimated to the cold. This is too cold for us. Colorado would be worse. But anyway, a lot of people in New Mexico say, why did you move to New Mexico just because you wanted to? Anyway. What's that? Yeah. New Mexico is a great place. Yes. I mean, look out there. You look out the window. It looks like pictures of the Grand Canyon and stuff, all the rocks and stuff. It's like one of the problems I had in Houston, I was teaching Earth and Space Science, and there is no geology in Houston. There are literally no rocks. I mean, my kids, when we went on vacation, when they were little, they would fill their pockets up with rocks because they never saw rocks. We literally, you could not find a rock in Houston. Yeah, it was exciting for them. Okay, well, let's get away from that. We could have long arguments over the pluses and minuses of living in New Mexico. We have rocks, yes. Okay, so this is the urban and rural population in the world from 1950 to 2030, so that's a projection. But you can see this, the red is the urban population, and the blue is the rural population, and it switched sometime around around 2010. It's the which side had the most people switched. And it's continuing. This number continues to go down because we need fewer people to farm, because we're technology and all that kind of thing. And people are moving to the cities in droves. We'll talk about that. There are pluses to urbanization because you leave the rest of the world less disturbed than if everybody lived out in the boonies. Okay, here's projected to 2050. And you can see there's a huge difference in their projections. The rural population is continuing to go up to about this point, and then it starts to decrease. And that's probably from population growth, because remember, we've gone from here less than 1 billion people in 1500, and we have over 7 billion now, and they're projecting looks like close to 9 billion by 2050. So. You think by it's 2100, well, and that's, we talked about that when we were talking about population. It does look like it's leveling off. The question is, where is it going to level off? Is it going to be 12 billion? Is it going to be 15 billion? And these numbers are hard to project, and they have a huge impact on what the planet's going to look like in 2100. And the thing I like to mention, and I probably said it so many times, y'all are sick of it, the population has more than doubled in my lifetime. Yeah. But I'm 52 and the population has doubled. So that's just mind-boggling. And here's another one, rural versus urban in the United States. You can see the rural population has stayed about the same, but considering how much the population has grown, that's unusual in itself. But the urban population has grown from 1910. So even with that population increase that we've been talking about, the rural population has stayed the same since 1910. Okay, so problems with urbanization, and there are a lot of them. Concentrating large numbers of people in a small space. That does some strange things to our psyche. You know, it does. Some people thrive on it, but other people don't. Depletion of resources. The resources in that area are going to be depleted quickly. Saltwater intrusion is something that you don't think about, but most of these urban areas, the big urban areas, are relatively close to the ocean. And saltwater is more dense than freshwater. So freshwater floats on top of saltwater. So this weird thing happens if you take too much groundwater out, saltwater from the ocean seeps in. And then all of a sudden your groundwater isn't fresh anymore, it's salty, which can cause some problems. And pollution. If you've got lots of people going from the suburbs to the cities, you've got to burn fossil fuels to do that. And again, we don't see that here because we don't have enough people in Farmington to have a real rush hour. But even in Albuquerque, during times of people going to work or leaving work, you've got a lot of people and a lot of cars driving and pumping fossil fuel, burning fossil fuels. Pavement. You don't think about pavement being a problem, but pavement is a big problem. Urbanization leads to large areas becoming impervious to water. Water can't soak through typical driveways and streets and parking lots. It doesn't allow water to reach the soil, so the water flows off the land quickly. It can't soak into the ground like it would if this was soil, and it can lead to flooding. It can cut out the ground, it can reduce the groundwater recharge. This is Walmart. This is the Walmart here in town, if I remember right. I think so. I think I copied this off Food Order last year. Oh, maybe that's the mall. That may be the mall. Yeah, that makes more sense. Okay, sorry about that. But yeah, even Walmart though is going to be big. But you see, you have this building, and the building takes up a certain amount of space and covers the ground. But you have an area much bigger than that building for people to park in. And that is all pavement, and there's no plants growing in it, except maybe a couple of weeds. And when water hits this pavement, it does not soak into the ground. It flows off the pavement, and you get this much area of water. You've got the water coming off the roof, you've got the water on the pavement, and that doesn't have anywhere to go until it flows off the pavement.
Like when it snows, whenever it snows a lot, and they like shovel all the snow, and it's like all in a big pile.
It's like a
in that
mountain.
parking lot for, like, a long time.
Yeah, and you don't realize how much that's covering, but where I looked at it was, maybe it wasn't the mall parking lot. It's like mountains as high as the ceiling here of snow that they've shoveled off. That may be a little bit exaggeration, but it's at least this tall or so. And it's all dirty and everything. And when it melts, it's not soaking into the ground like snow would normally do. It's running off the driveway, and a lot of it's evaporating. So you're losing all of this water that would normally be soaking into the soil and helping the environment. There are people that are working on permeable asphalt, yes. As far as I know, it hasn't caught on anywhere yet, but they are working on that. And that would make a big difference. So how do you reduce urban runoff? Traditional pavement can be replaced with permeable pavement. So yeah, there is such a thing. Planting trees. Making more green space. And here's the big thing that Americans don't like to do. Increased use of public transportation, reducing the amount of roads and parking that we need. But Americans don't want to give up our cars, even in places where it would be possible. In New Mexico, if you're going to drive around New Mexico, you pretty much need a car because everything is hours away from each other. But in cities, you could live, if they did enough public transportation, you could live in the suburbs and not really need your car as much. And you could ride the bus to work. Yeah, and New York is a big one. New York does a good job with public transportation. There's a lot of people in New York that don't have driver's license and don't own cars because they don't need it. You can get to the grocery store and all that. Houston is much more spread out than New York. It would have been difficult, and especially if you live in the suburbs. They put in some bus lines, and they built a train line, but it strangely enough went from one part of downtown to another part of downtown where nobody lived. So that was kind of weird. My kids and I would ride on it in the summer just for fun. We'd drive to the zoo and ride it to the museum district and stuff like that. But for the most part, though, with the exception of compact cities like New York, and maybe some areas in Colorado, there are places where there's good public transportation, but especially in the West, public transportation is not good enough to make it comfortable for you not to have a car. Japan is very compact. They're on an island. They can't really spread out as much, so their cities are very compact and they've got good public transportation. Yeah. Here's another possibility: build up, not out. Live in high rises. So that's what skyscrapers are for. You get into the city where the land is so expensive, it makes sense to build a skyscraper that's 60 stories. My first summer job was working at a law library in downtown Houston on the 61st floor. It was bizarre. And I would ride the bus. Went to a place, we had park and ride spots where you drive, park, get on the bus, and go into downtown. And it was kind of cool, but I do not like cities that much. There's an awful lot of people in a very small space. So.
That's cool. All your friends will be everywhere.
Yeah, some people like it. And I mean, there's museums, there's zoos, there's restaurants, all kinds of stuff in the cities.
Everything's right there.
Theaters. If you've got money and you want to do all that stuff, it's great. Shopping, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of good stuff about it. Obviously, my family didn't care for it that much because we moved to New Mexico. Okay, urban sprawl is the rapid expansion of the borders of cities, making room for a growing population. And many people don't want to live in the city. They want to have access to the city, but they don't want to live there. This is in New Mexico. This is in Farmington, actually. Let's see, that's Mission Bend. It's just a little housing development area. But you can see how it changes. And I don't remember exactly where in Farmington this is, but you could do this pretty much anywhere. Farmington was tiny 50 years ago, and it's grown. So you can see, you can watch this little spot holds out for a while. It looks like it was a field of some kind. And then finally there's houses on it too. So even towns like Farmington have urban sprawl. Just the city growing. And Farmington had a boomtown phase when it was growing really fast. When oil expansion was thriving here. A lot of people moved here, a lot of people got jobs here, and it grew. So here's some pictures from Houston. You see all open fields. And then it's solid houses. You watch the airport get built right in here. There it goes. This is a subdivision down here. There, and then all of a sudden they put in streets and lots of houses. You can see they actually make the lake over here. They put in a lake. I don't know if that's for a golf course or what, but a lot of change. Here's an area around the airport. You can see the airport was pretty much by itself, and then all of this area fills in with stores and houses. Okay, so this is the area where I lived before we moved to New Mexico. And the first area, this is probably the 60s or 70s. And you can see this whole area grew up. Our house was over here. This was the high school where I taught. This is in Pearland, which is a suburb of Houston, and it was one of the fastest growing areas in the country while we were living there. Just in 10 years that we lived there, my wife could see a difference in the traffic going from Pearland to Houston because so many people moved there. It was one of the closest rural type areas to the downtown, and so a lot of people wanted to move there. Problems with urban sprawl. Much more land is turned to human living space. You destroy habitat. And you burn fossil fuels for commuting. Okay. And here's a graph talking about all the problems with urban sprawl. Did I go too fast? Do y'all need back? You get it? Okay. So land-wise, you lose cropland because people will pay more for a house and a lot than your farm would be worth. And loss of forests and grasslands, wetlands, fragmentation of habitat. If you have more roads, you have more animals being killed on the roads, and you've got more erosion because of more of the roads. Health and aesthetics. Typically, people that live in cities have more problem with weight gain. There's less you can be less active if you live in urban areas. There's noise pollution, light pollution. I think it was California, or it may have been New York, one of the big city areas. There was a big blackout, and all the lights went out, and people were calling in and reporting this weird hazy thing in the sky, and it was the Milky Way. These people had never seen the Milky Way. Most of my students in the Houston area had never seen the Milky Way. You had to actually drive over 2 hours to get somewhere where it was dark enough to see the Milky Way. Occasionally here, if we have a really dark night, I can just barely see it from my backyard. When we lived in Alamogordo, we could see it from our backyard. I live right across from San Juan College, and there's a lot of light pollution there, but nothing like the city. I mean, and when the comet was here last summer, I could drive like 10 minutes out of town, and there was the Milky Way, there was the comet. It was great. You didn't see the comet? Yeah, there was a comet that showed up, and it was visible to the naked eye. Like 20,000 years from now. You missed that one. This was a long-term comet. This was the first time we'd seen it. But I don't remember exactly, but I think it was 20,000 years. I'll show you some pictures if I can remember. Light pollution, anyways, people don't worry about it as much, but it is a thing. Aside from people not being able to see the stars, y'all watched Madagascar, right? And when they've said, "Oh, look, the star is out," and they nope, that's a helicopter, and then they go to Madagascar and look at the sky. And in New Mexico, we're blessed with being able to see the sky much better than most places where people live. Like I said, to see the stars very well in the Houston area, you literally had to drive at least an hour, maybe 2, to get out of town. Really? Around Alamogordo, there's an observatory nearby, and so they have lots of rules about light pollution, and they have to use certain types of lights. And that's the problem with light pollution. The AP exam doesn't talk about it much, but it's easy to get rid of it because you don't want to light up the sky anyway. Street lights, you want the light to go down to where people are. You don't want it to shine up in the sky, and there are ways to make lights that do that. Of course, traffic congestion, loss of recreation. If you've got a city where you used to have a park or something like that. Water, you have increased contaminated runoff. Cars, if you've ever noticed where you park your car, most cars drip something. And when you're driving, it drips on the road. And when it rains, that all gets washed off onto the ground. Decreased evapotranspiration. There's fewer plants, so you've got less water vapor being pumped into the air. Decreased groundwater recharge. Increased use of surface groundwater. I keep talking about Houston because that's what I'm familiar with, but there are parts of Houston, the Houston area, certain neighborhoods that were condemned because the industry pumped so much water out of the ground. When the water was out of the ground actually sank. And there was a neighborhood that didn't used to flood, and after this, every time there was a super high tide or a lot of rain, the neighborhood would flood, and they actually condemned it and turned it into a park. But the ground actually sank because they pumped out so much groundwater. Yeah, that's probably the same thing. Yeah. And Mexico City used to be basically a lake. So that's a big problem there. Increased flooding, decreased natural sewage treatment. Energy, you use more energy, you increase waste production, increase greenhouse gas emissions, urban heat island effect. concrete heats up a lot. So cities are actually hotter than the urban areas around them. And air pollution from all the cars and all the industry. Economics, cities usually have higher taxes. Decline of centralized downtowns. This is a big problem in a lot of areas, is people don't want to live in the middle of the city. They want to live outside the city, so the downtown turns into a slum. Increased unemployment in inner cities. You've got people moving to the outer edge, and a lot of inner cities now are not nice. Loss of tax base in central cities. But okay, I'm going to show you some Google Earth stuff I pulled up the other day. I guess you've noticed I kind of like Google Earth. And it's much better with a fast internet connection. This is much nicer. Okay, so just the area I was talking about, the Houston-Galveston Metroplex. This is Galveston, it's on the island. And used to, it was a long way from Houston to Galveston. And they always talked about Houston grew outwards. And so now you can pretty much drive from downtown, actually from Conroe. You can drive all the way from Conroe through Houston to Galveston, and you're never in an area where there's not buildings. It's solid buildings all the way through. When we would travel to New Mexico or wherever, it would take us over an hour to get out of Houston. And I grew up, the places I lived, I never lived inside Houston. I lived down here, lived over here. My wife and I lived in here, and we lived in Galveston. So we were always in this outside area of Houston. But you can see it's pretty much city all the way through. Here's a good example of urban sprawl. This is where NASA, the Johnson Space Center was built. So they've got pictures. This is the 1944. And you see it's pretty much not much there. It's a wetland area. There's Clear Lake, which wasn't clear. It was kind of an odd name for it. There you go. And they don't have the good pictures for all of them, but you can see this area versus this area. This area, the picture is updated. You can already see buildings coming in. And now look at it. This is 1978. 1980s. And compare it with today. That picture didn't show up as well. But anyway, in 50 years, this went from a wetland area to solid houses. And there's Pearland urban sprawl I was talking about. This is 1965, and this is the present. I saw that growing up because we drove all the way to Pearland to go to the eye doctor because it was the wife of someone my dad worked with. And we drove through farms and stuff. And when we moved there, there wasn't like that at all. And let's see. Farmington. Here's just one spot I found in Farmington to show you urban sprawl. So this is 1997. Not that terribly long ago as things go. Then you see the houses being built up. That's 2005, so not even 10 years later. And it hadn't changed, didn't change that much after that. But this is San Juan College over here. You can't see that. There we go. And we live in this area, and we talked to some people that lived in the house where we live, like in the 70s. And they said, oh, yeah, we had quail in our yard and all this kind of stuff. I said, we've never seen any quail. Well, when they lived there, this was all empty. Hey, there's the turtle taking a shower. This was all empty. There's a lot more wildlife. We still have a good bit of wildlife. We have foxes and stuff in our yard at night and things like that. But it went from this in 1997 to this. So let's see, what else? Oh, and here's where the school is. Go back to 1985. Can't really see much there. Here's 1997. Okay. There we go. So this is where the school is going to be. You can see they've started building it. And you can see there are some buildings and stuff around. Let's see. But more built up. See that this whole neighborhood was not there in 1995. Okay, so let's see if this came in. I wanted to talk about Albuquerque. Albuquerque is got a unique issue, and urban sprawl is not going to be as huge an issue with Albuquerque as it is in other places. So let's see if we can zoom in. I'm gonna have to open it up somewhere else so I can zoom it. There we go, download. Albuquerque is surrounded. It really can't grow like a lot of other areas, a lot of other cities will have been able to grow outward and have all the urban sprawl. Albuquerque can't do that. Where is it? Here we go. All right. Okay, so here's Albuquerque. Why can't I? Oh, there it is. It's off the screen. Okay, so Albuquerque is surrounded. It can't grow much like a normal city would in a lot of places. It's surrounded by public lands. The green is public lands over here. This is the Sandia Mountains. This is an Air Force base or military base. I don't remember if it's an Air Force. I guess it is. And then there's Indian reservations of different tribes all around it. And I think the gray is more public lands of one kind or another. So Albuquerque has this little area, and that's all it's going to be able to grow into. So Albuquerque is not going to sprawl like Houston and take it where it takes over an hour to get out of Albuquerque. Because unless the government gives them some of the public lands, or they can spread out to Bernillo and Rio Rancho. I don't remember what the gray is. Let's see if we can find out. No, I sure can't see it there. Anyway, Albuquerque is unique among cities in that way. It's not going to have the urban sprawl issues. If Albuquerque is going to grow, it's going to have to grow up. You know, more high rises and things like that. Let's see if we can zoom in here. Okay. National Park Service, that doesn't look right. Oh, BLM, I think is what that other area was. Bureau of Land Management. So anyway, if there is any growth, it's basically going to have to go this way. and there's a little bit of space in here, but Albuquerque is bound on all sides. So our biggest city is not going to be able to get the urban sprawl like a lot of areas, which that's not necessarily a bad thing. Let's see, back to the person. I don't think there's a whole lot left. Okay, that was the end of the presentation. So, all right, how much time do we have? About 15 minutes. We've got 15 minutes. I could let y'all work on your study guide, or we could do 15 minutes of a Kahoot. What would you rather do? You want to do 15 minutes of Kahoot? Okay. Now remember, I had someone complain last time that the questions on the exam were not the questions on Kahoot. Well, sometimes, and some teachers will use the exact questions from the test, but mine pretty much just covers the same material. So the questions you see here will cover the same material that'll be on the test, but it will not be the exact questions. And even if some of the stuff doesn't cover exact questions that show up on the test, it's materials that will be out of the AP exam. So. Hey, I got it on the first try. Okay. So again, sign in quickly since we don't have a lot of time, but use a name that I'll recognize. I'm assuming you guys on Zoom can see this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. I did everything right for once. How about that? I don't even know how many people we have on Zoom. Let's see. Seven. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so that's it. Let's get started. Okay, farmers use it because exact amounts of nutrients for plant needs can be met. It's not the only reason, but. Okay, synthetic fertilizer. You know exactly what's in it. If you're just putting compost, you can do some analysis and everything, but you can fine tune your nutrients with chemical fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers. Okay, GMOs are leading to the loss of original native plants because of crossbreeding affecting genetic diversity. Okay, this is true. They found native corn varieties hundreds of miles from factory farms that have genes that we've put into corn to make their own pesticides, which can be a problem. You don't want wild plants killing random insects, you know. I am not totally against GMOs, but there are some that I don't care for, and there's some we have to be careful with. But what are good recharge zones for aquifers? Water soaking into the ground. Okay, the correct answer is a field. All these others right now are impermeable. And like you mentioned, that we are working on permeable pavement, which would be really nice to let the water soak into the ground and everything, not have as much runoff. Okay, what is integrated pest management? Okay, so integrated pest management is integrated. It uses several different types of controls to control pests. Biological controls, physical controls, which would be basically just removing them or blocking them, not letting them get there in the first place, and chemical pesticides if you have to. Only biological controls or only chemicals, that's not what integrated means. Farm-raised salmon. Okay, so all of these are right. This is a bad question. I copied this from someone else's Kahoot and made some changes, but I didn't have time to make all the changes I would have liked to. So y'all didn't get a chance to put more than one answer, right? You just pick an answer. They just happen to all be right. Yeah, all of these are true. What resource is primarily sought using mountaintop removal in the United States? And the answer is coal. We don't harvest enough granite to take down the whole mountain usually. There may be a couple of places where there's quarries and you remove a good portion of the mountain, but we just don't. The amount that they remove to get coal is not anywhere near enough. We don't take near that much granite. What was the Green Revolution? Okay, dramatic increase in crop yields due to improved agricultural technology. What is contour plowing? We actually didn't talk about this much, tilling and plowing, and I realized that's something we should probably try to talk about before the AP exam. I'm not sure how I missed that, but you should be able to figure out contour plowing. I don't even know what the yellow one, you get draw on grass? I don't even know what that means. Okay, planting and plowing on a slope to follow contour lines. This is not contour plowing, this is something else, but contour plowing would look like this. You follow the curve of the land, and that cuts down on runoff. And when you're in an area that's not flat, that has farms, they usually use this, and you'll see they don't have straight rows, they curve and follow the curve of the land. Use of this method of control requires concentrations be increased often because pests develop resistance. Okay, pesticides. The pests develop resistance, so it takes more of it to kill them. If at some point, no matter how much you put on it, it might not kill them. The biggest risk to communities surrounding mountaintop removal is this is not a great question either. But there is one best answer there. Okay. So the biggest risk, landslides are a risk, and there are people that have been killed by rocks falling off mountains when they're doing mountaintop removal, all the blasting and everything. But the biggest is they've broken up all these rocks, and the toxins and the heavy metals and all of that, when it rains through those broken up rock and soak into the aquifer, and you can contaminate the groundwater. What is the result of repeated irrigation and dry climates leading to the accumulation of salts in the soil? I've actually seen this around here. You go to an area, there's actually, I've seen it on the side of the road on the way to the high school. There's places where the ground turns white. Yep. And that's soil salinization. Your minerals build up. And in some places that happens naturally, but if you irrigate a lot, you're taking the groundwater that has lots of minerals and putting it into the ground, and it makes the ground where it doesn't grow plants anymore. What are some problems of the Green Revolution? Somebody from Europe wrote this question. Look at how they spelled fertilizer. With an S, yeah. Okay, yeah, loss of biodiversity and overuse of fertilizer. What do you think it means by sustainable forestry? And remember, forestry refers to managing forests. And if you can't read that, the red one says all trees are removed at the same time. This frees up space, take everything. The blue one, some trees removed while the rest grow. Really? I know some of the largest trees, they don't tell people where they are, so people won't go and mess with them. But yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if at some point there are much larger trees that have been cut. Redwood is a good timber. People harvest it a lot. I've never seen those. That's one of my, I want to make a trip to the West Coast to see the redwoods. Okay, you guys have a good day. Okay, trenches dug, that's obviously furrow.